I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my Saja co-host, Brett.
Saja, am I still here?
You're still here.
Hello?
Saja was, look at me,
Saja?
Bonnie sent that amazing Italian word that means wise and sage. So Bonnie thinks you're Saja, but you know who's
Saja.
actually Saja? Saja. Who's actually Saja are our amazing hosts from the Murder Sheet, Kevin and Aine. We love that you guys literally hopped from your live straight to ours. We are so thankful for your time. They are here to kind of, if you haven't been following all the flurry of filings in the Delphi case post-trial, you're not the only one because there's been a lot. And they're here to give us a quick bang boom, everything you need to know and what it means.
And I just want to say, before we get started, everybody knows who you guys are, so you don't feel like we have to introduce you or anything. But, we struggled with these filings because they're so worthless. I didn't want to waste people's time. I didn't want to give oxygen to them. But the problem was, it's this case, as you've said, drives people crazy. And so even normally wise, down-to-earth reporters start going crazy every time they see one of these things. I don't really know how to handle it. But you guys, I feel like, stumbled upon the perfect way to do it. And I just love how at the beginning of your episodes, you say to people, don't listen to these. They're a waste of time. This episode is unimportant. Like, just the honesty of that was so pure. Now I went ahead and listened to them because I listen to everything you guys do. But it's so true that this episode, I'm going to follow their lead. If you're listening to this, turn it off. Listen to something else. Go listen to the birds and the trees or read a book because this topic is a waste of your time, but we're going to talk about it anyway. So thank you guys for wasting your time and our time on this topic.
But wasting it less because instead of giving the due time that other people may give to it, they're going to package it all up together, tell you everything you need to know. Look at them. We are so lucky to have them. With that lead up, I'm sorry, we haven't even gotten a word in edgewise for you guys. Hi, Kevin. Hi, Aine. Thank you for coming back on.
Thank you for having us. As always, it's an honor. And yes, we are so excited to be here. And thank you. So honestly, we do feel it's a waste of time. Hopefully it can be helpful for people to hear how it's a waste of time so they're less susceptible. But, it's funny. People who hate us were so mad about that approach. They were like, this is bad business for the Murder Sheet. And I was like, thanks for caring. Like, they're worried about our financial acumen, I guess. And it's just like, we have to be honest. I think when you cover something, you are giving it some importance. And we've talked a lot about this with folks we trust behind the scenes. Like, how do we kind of clarify things without giving it that importance? And so hopefully this kind of splits the baby, so to speak, a little bit in terms of that. And I think it gives people a laugh.
Well, let me just say this. So am I right in saying that with these filings, after at least 2 years, I don't even know, of chasing Odinists through the forest, that Odinism is now dead, at least is the main theory of the defense?
Yes, it would appear so.
It would definitely appear so. It would appear that they've shifted their attention back to some older suspects, namely Kegan Kline and Ron Logan.
And in fact, not even separate, right? Now it was Kegan Kline and Ron Logan all along.
Yes.
Yeah, working together like a team of baseball all-stars. Just put all their favorites into one big theory. And I found it interesting in the most recent filing, I believe it was, Baldwin referred to Logan and Kegan Kline as the two most likely suspects. And if you really believe
mind-blowing.
Why did we spend a year and a half on those?
And I was going to say, those of us who spent a lot of time watching the coverage of the trial, because there weren't cameras in the courtroom, and you guys did incredible coverage of it, might be a little surprised if they are the most likely suspects in this, all-star team. Why are we just now hearing about it now? So tell us about how they're introducing it and how they're pivoting, or if they're even addressing what happened with their defense strategy previously.
So when it came time for the defense to ask for third-party suspects to be, an option for them at trial, they did, in fairness, include Ron Logan and Kegan Kline in that pitch. But to give you a sense, at the 3-day hearing, where it was sort of basically a mini trial, where it was their chance to say, here's why all these, avenues should be included. They spent an inordinate amount of time on the Odinism angle. They spent, I thought Brad Rosie, in fairness, actually had some decent moments with Kegan Kline, but it was very abbreviated. I mean, I think they brought Detective Dave Vito up there to ask him about Kegan. I think that was kind of the long and short of it. And again, they brought up some interesting points, but it also came out that Kegan Kline was on his phone in Peru, Indiana, well away from Delphi at the time of the murder. So that's a pretty devastating sort of piece of evidence against Kline. And then, I mean, I have to just say, Ron Logan, they didn't try. Jennifer Auger stood up, kind of stumbled through a few points about laundry, and then kind of slunk back off to their table. So Logan seemed to be the furthest thing from their minds. They really didn't put in a lot on that. And so that's how we started on these two. So it was obviously...
But Anya, they did that because the prosecution was hiding the star witness in this case who could bring it all together. If they had known about Ricky Davis, then they probably wouldn't have talked about Odinism at all. They just would have talked about those two guys at the hearing. I mean, am I wrong about that? That seems to be what the filing is saying, right?
They filed a motion to correct error after their client was found guilty and sentenced, not an unusual procedure. And in that motion, they bring up, oh, golly, there was this guy who was incarcerated with Ron Logan named Ricky Davis. And Ricky Davis says that Ron Logan confessed to him. And furthermore, Ricky Davis even says that Ron Logan used a box cutter. But the fact of the matter is they had that information well before the trial. And in fact, defense attorney Andrew Baldwin had even done an interview with Mr. Davis while Mr. Davis was incarcerated. So it wasn't evidence they didn't have. It was evidence they had and didn't use. And I hasten to add there's some good reasons for that we can go into, including the fact that Mr. Davis failed a lie detector test rather spectacularly. And he also, in his accounting of the crime, included a number of details that were wildly inaccurate.
And we've been talking about how they brought together the fantastic duo. But it wasn't a duo, right? Wasn't it actually a trio of killers? Who is the third person that Ricky Davis suggested?
Because if you have two killers, you know what's better than two? Three.
Yes.
Three.
The triumvirate,
Well, initially, it was suggested that Baldwin did not reveal the identity of this third man. And he indicated that Ricky Davis had not only been the recipient of these confessions from Logan and later confessions from Kegan Kline, but he had sent detailed letters about this to the prosecutor, Nicholas McClelland, and that these letters were not turned over to the defense and they had startling revelations. And as you are well aware, one of the startling revelations was the identity of the third man, the third killer. And according to Ricky Davis, the third man was Baldwin's client, Richard Allen.
Okay, so this is...
I just want to take a moment.
I don't know that this is going to help. You guys, when your defense strategy is that there is a triumvirate of killers, you don't want your client to be one of them.
I wouldn't think so.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine the world in which...
Is that why Baldwin kept it a secret? Because he was like, this isn't great, but you know what is great? An unknown mystery third killer.
And I feel like so many people out there are so misinformed about Brady, right? Because they think Brady means if the prosecution, every document, every video, every piece of information, they have to turn it over. And if they don't turn it over, then retrial, right? Because that's a Brady violation, not to turn over something. And that's not what Brady is at all. It has to be exculpatory. And one thing that seems to be missing, and I'm still not sure, and I'm hoping you guys can explain this to me. Let's just assume for a second that the dastardly prosecutor received this information and said, man, I bet the defense would love to see this. I am going to suppress it. I'm going to hide this information. That's step one of a Brady claim, because obviously if you turn it over, there's no Brady claim. That's step one. How do we get to step two, where the information is exculpatory if it inculpates, which is the opposite, by the way, of exculpates their client? Can you explain that? Is that explained in the brief? Did they explain that in the motion?
Baldwin's argument is basically, I guess, that he can pick and choose which details of the story that Davis provided that he likes. And I think his argument, to try to struggle to be fair to him, is that Ricky Davis was accurately reporting what Kagan Klein told him, and Kagan Klein lied and implicated Richard Allen falsely. Now, the problem with that is, if we assume, okay, we can trust Ricky Davis, this guy has amazing credibility. If he reports that he personally heard something, you could take that to the bank. Now, the problem with that is, in one of these letters, Ricky Davis says that, oh, there's this attorney out there named Andrew Baldwin who is hinting that he wants Ricky Davis to lie.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen
to these, because it's hard for me I just am not smart enough of an attorney to understand how that needle was threaded with no thread.
Did he know that? Did he know?
Or was it
in his
oopsie after
defense?
the
Did
fact?
he not know that in the letter it said that he was essentially suborning perjury, or at least, what is it? He said, "You know how it is," wink, right? Wasn't that essentially what he said to him?
Yeah.
When he asked him, just go ahead and say what you need to say.
I would speculate a rational person would not have made a big deal about this if he had known. I don't know. I've been following this case very closely for a long time now, and I don't understand Baldwin's thinking, because there are a number of times throughout the case where he's presented something as a huge bombshell, and then with just a modicum of research, it just completely collapses. So I don't know if it's incompetence or laziness or wishful thinking, but this same sort of thing keeps happening.
Actually, he cited some of those instances in the latest filing where it was like, remember all these greatest hits where the prosecution was bad? And it was a bunch of things that basically the defense had claimed and then not been able to back up, but it was just like relitigating them.
I was going to say, this is what we talk about when, I know we've talked about it with you guys a lot, ethical journalism, right? Because oftentimes people don't then know or follow a splash. There's the splash, and then oftentimes people don't know what the truth is behind it, even if it's disproven. I mean, we see this all the time. So I'm not saying necessarily that's what Baldwin did here, but it's effective in the fact that everyone was like, who's the third person? There's these other people. There's a whole nother theory. There's a triumvirate. It has nothing to do with poor Richard Allen. And so this is exactly what we're talking about, guys, when we're talking about ethical journalism, right? Well, ethical lawyering as well, in terms of you don't perpetuate the storyline when it's been disproven.
And on that point, Alice, and I'm always glad to have Aine on here because she is a journalist. And these days, you just have to say you're a journalist and you're a journalist, but you're an actual journalist, trained journalist, we'll say. And look, Andrew Baldwin, I don't know Andrew Baldwin. Apparently he's been successful before. So I don't know what happened to him in this case. As you guys have said, something about this case makes rational people insane. And maybe that affected him as well. I don't know if he's lost his mind, if he's incompetent, or if he has no ethical guidelines at all. I don't know what's wrong with him. But what confuses me is that he and his compatriot have done this over and over again. They have cried wolf so many times. And it seems like the journalists are like, well, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me 3 times, fool me 4 times. It's like, is there ever a point where they stop and say, we're going to take a moment? This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill, too.
You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. Can I throw in another option there? And I'd love for both of you to comment on it because I know you've done some investigative research on this. Or are they letting other people essentially feed them these theories for purposes of making a story? So, I mean, let's just say it, right? For purposes of either press release, or maybe they're not even truly the ones behind the thinking of these theories. Somehow they have farmed out these theories, which sound like great books, sound like great Netflix specials, but do not have any basis within the law. So I'll throw that other option out there for you.
It's a really boring answer, but I think there's a lot going on here. And I think one of the big problems is a lot of journalists approach cases like this in the context of they have to then run and cover traffic pileup in 5 minutes. So they're rushing. That's just the reality of a lot of news stations nowadays. I don't necessarily think there's anything malicious or anything. I think a lot of reporters consider, as long as my article itself is relatively objective and seeing both sides, then it's not a problem. But the problem is, just by covering something and just by having the splashy headlines of defense claims bombshells, you are putting your hand on the scale. And so there's a lot of, I think, micromanaging of objectivity as best as they can, but it doesn't really make up for the macro issue of like taking it seriously at all. And that's just not something you can do unless you're really immersed in the case constantly and seeing all those ebbs and flows. And a lot of people who are sort of coming into it, they're sort of hitting it and then going on to the next thing. And then maybe they hit it again in another month. And it's just an unfortunate reality for a lot of people. That being said, I think that's what is mostly going on. I know for a fact that there are people out there who have an absolute agenda, who absolutely have a favorite suspect, whose, suspect is now more at the forefront now. And so this really benefits them to cover it as much as possible and in a really salacious way, because I think they imagine that this will benefit, basically it would kill a book deal if you're saying this guy definitely did it and then someone else gets convicted of it. So I think there can be maliciousness, but mostly it's just like, I'll tell you, like when I was covering Walmart, there's kind of a concept in journalism. Hey, if the Walmart CEO says it, we're running it because it's interesting because he's the Walmart CEO. If Doug McMillon gets out there and starts saying wild stuff, we're going to run it. And that can be understandable, but there can also be sort of like a abdication of responsibility because you're like, well, I'm just saying what Walmart said. It's not my fault that they're saying some crazy stuff, not to pick on Walmart, but, I think that happens with the defense. If they're the defense attorneys, what they say is newsworthy.
I also think it's interesting that there was a gag order in this case. And I think the defense realized relatively early on that they could get around that pretty easily by treating their court filings like press releases. And they began tailoring the press releases, not for the judge, who would actually be the audience for the filing to make a ruling, but they would be tailoring them for the media and for the internet.
This has been a question that we've had throughout all of these filings throughout trial, which is like, where does Richard Allen sit in all this? I know in the pretrial filings, there were claims that basically what his attorneys were claiming that he was saying was different than all of his, for example, recorded confessions, right? It seemed like two different people. There was the Richard Allen, his defense attorney seemed to hold up and prop up and say, he's either losing his mind and eating his evidence or he's absolutely innocent, versus what we saw, which was a pretty consistent, telling everyone around him he wanted to unload this guilt of having murdered Abby and Libby. So does he even come within these filings? Do we know what he's thinking? What's going on? Because remember, they're supposed to be representing Richard Allen even in these appeals.
We have not been able to get in touch with him, I don't think, right? No. In terms of, like what he thinks. And I'm not aware of a journalist who has had that opportunity to sort of sit down and say, hey, are you looking to do appeals? What do you do? Like, what are your thoughts? Are you still saying you're innocent and whatnot?
But it's a great point because there is a wide gulf between the Richard Allen who made the phone calls where he confessed to his wife and the Richard Allen that Dr. Walla and the prison guards described in their written reports and the Richard Allen that the defense presents. I'm not sure if there is an explanation for that difference, but it certainly exists.
My feeling is that he was, this is what happened. He confessed and he, thought that this would get him right with God. And he was profoundly rejected by those in his life as a result of that and changed course. I think it's just, I think it was just a pragmatic decision at the end of the day. You can be confessing and be truthful and have your God, or you can have your family. He even said something as much. I can have God in my life or I can have my family in my life. So, I think I don't think he's going to hold off on an appeal or anything like that just because of the way that happened.
And it's funny because, obviously we're making fun of this filing and there are two of them because there's the state's response and then the defense files a response to that. And just real quick, some of you have asked about the trial attorneys. So we're still sort of in trial world because these are all post-verdict filings. every time you file one of these, it kind of kicks the appeal a little bit down the road until they're decided. So yes, they're still on the case. Presumably they're billing for this stuff. I guess we'll find out. But at some point, this is going to turn towards appeal land. And, one thing I'll say, I've seen people defend this and say, look, it's a defense attorney's job to make every possible argument. So that's just what they're doing. And this is standard practice. And that's a fine argument. But the fact of the matter is, judges are people. They're not robots. And when a judge sees you for 2 years claim this is an Odinist conspiracy, we should have been able to put on Odinism. There's all this evidence for Odinism. The fact that we didn't get to talk about Odinism is such a violation of our client's rights that he needs to have a whole new trial where we can do Odinism. And then you're like, argument 2. Actually, it wasn't the Odinist at all. It was these two guys, actually maybe in cahoots with our guy, but we're going to ignore that part. And here's all the reasons why that's the case. And forget about the Odinist. When a judge sees that, they see they're just throwing spaghetti at the wall. They see whatever, maybe you have a technical violation here, but there's no substance to it. We're not going to reverse your conviction on this. A 100-page brief with 25 arguments is far weaker than a 30-page brief with 2. And I feel like these guys, the way they're doing this, they are undercutting themselves. Before we started this, I talked about how a lot of times when you have 2 defendants, you'll have antagonistic defenses. You'll have these defenses that are mutually exclusive, and it's a big problem. Sometimes you have to separate the trial and everything else. But I've never seen a defendant who has antagonistic defenses that are opposed to each other, that his attorneys are putting forward like this. And what's crazy is in the reply brief, it seems like they put both of them in there. They argue the first half is all about this and Ron Logan and Kagan Klein, and then he's back on the Odinist. And I don't understand how this is a coherent defense.
It's not. It makes my head spin trying to understand it and trying to explain it. It's just an incoherent mess.
Yeah. And also, maybe you guys have a different read on it as attorneys, but for me, some of these filings have felt increasingly personal and just written in a kind of an emotional style that I find.
Well, Baldwin's the only one on this, right?
Yes.
Isn't he the only one who signed it?
The only one who signed it.
Which is really interesting.
Have they done that before? Was the Frank's motion just signed by one of them, or did both of them sign it?
I don't recall.
I think I may be wrong, and people can certainly correct me on this. I think there have been other ones that have only been signed by one or another throughout. But this one really feels like Baldwin, just has that tone.
And I think behind the scenes throughout this whole process, there has been underlying contempt from the defense towards particularly prosecutor Nicholas McClellan. I think they viewed him as a hillbilly, someone who was inexperienced, just a young idiot, basically. And then for that person who they disrespected to turn around and so thoroughly outclass them in the courtroom, I think that did some real damage to Baldwin's ego that he is still wrestling with and trying to process.
And while we're all laughing because these arguments are absolutely incoherent and ridiculous, the reality for the prosecutor is they do have to respond to this. And you know what you're doing when you're responding to these, because they have to respond point by point, right? I mean, there's the large overarching argument, but when you are faced with a filing, you have to respond to the points and make the argument. Those are the hardest responses, by the way, the responses that are like, Judge, this is so ridiculous. It's difficult for me to find case law and arguments that in and of themselves are not ridiculous to put on paper, but you have to do that. It takes more skill to write that type of a response and takes you away from all your other duties. It takes a lot of work to respond to spaghetti on the wall. I just want to note that we get to sit here and kind of laugh about it, but when I get one of those motions and I have to respond to it, that's when it's face palm, because I know how much time it takes to respond to it, because it is not a straightforward, coherent argument that you can say, oh, well, this case is directly on point and it defeats your argument. It's rather like trying to be a sieve to catch all the crazy that's being thrown at the wall.
I mean, one of their arguments is they didn't call Kathy Allen.
Yes.
I don't understand. I don't understand what you're saying. Why didn't you call her? You knew about her. You could have called her.
The Odinist conspiracy, the Odinist/Klein-Logan conspiracy, I guess I should say.
And it's well, help me, just correct me if I'm wrong on this. But what it seemed like they were saying was, if they had called her, she would have said that Richard Allen was with her when Richard Allen was supposed to have been meeting with Keegan Kline and Ron Logan after the murder. Right. So therefore, Ricky Davis was lying about that part, but not the rest of it. But they don't seem to understand.
Right. Don't strain a muscle. Don't strain a muscle. Okay.
I'm just trying. I'm trying to understand.
You can't right this ship no matter how hard you try. But I think Anya might have
this whole thing wide open and just totally wrecked the credibility of Ricky Davis.
I think one of the people in our Facebook group said it was like Inception. It really was. It was like we're in the mind of Ricky Davis, in the mind of Keegan Kline, and then what Logan. And at some point, it's like, what is like? It's like the stupidest crossover event of all time in true crime. All these different people, and like I just don't know. And you know what you said about the McClellan having to respond to this? If they're still billing the county for Baldwin's hours to basically throw a hissy fit on paper, then that's outrageous. You know, people should not have their tax bills go up.
I'm pretty sure they are, right? You don't turn into like privately retained at some point. So
and they're not doing it for free.
So no, this is taxpayer dollars on both sides, right?
And I just want to be clear, just so everybody out there understands in case you haven't seen this. So the timeline here is not we had a trial. The defense had to make all these defense decisions. They decided what their defense was going to be. And then they learned about the existence of Ricky Davis. And if only they had known about Ricky Davis before, they could have made a strategic decision about whether or not it was worth it to use him, even given his credibility issues. Like, that is not the argument they're making, which would be a better argument. That is not the argument. Am I right about that?
That is correct. They cannot make that argument because Baldwin met with Ricky Davis in March of 2024.
And that's before the trial, right?
The trial was in October. So, yeah.
Okay.
And at that time, he knew that Ricky Davis was saying some things that didn't add up with the evidence. For instance, Ricky Davis, I believe, has the bodies of the girls being moved, 3 times?
3 times, and that they were not killed at the scene. And let me tell you, for everyone who sat through Major Pat Cicero's testimony and the testimony of the 3 state police CSIs, no. I mean, like, they were killed there.
All the physical evidence clearly indicates they were killed at the scene.
And let me just say, they could have brought on their own crime scene experts. They chose not to. They could have disputed that or said, here's why they were killed elsewhere. They didn't do anything.
And I just want to be clear for everybody out there. We've talked about Brady. We need to do an episode on Brady. But how prejudicial the information was to the defense, how exculpatory the evidence was to the defense, those are all things the judge considers. So the judge is considering this information not in a vacuum, but in the totality of the trial, all the evidence that came in. Would this evidence, if presented, have been beneficial to the defense? How beneficial it has to be is, different strokes for different folks. But nevertheless, in this case, it seems like this is not beneficial at all to the defense. And in fact, is inculpatory. And if it's inculpatory, by the way, there's no discovery obligation if you're not going to use it in court. So if we get information that could possibly, we get a jailhouse informant who says, much like this one, hey, your guy that you're trying did it. Now, he had a couple of accomplices. You might want to look into those guys, but he did it. And I can testify that one of his accomplices said he did it. That's inculpatory information. If we're not going to use that, we don't have a discovery obligation for the defense. It's only if we're going to use it. We have to let them know because they're not supposed to be any surprises at trial. And that, I can't even, the fact that they're trying to claim, and I hate to be repetitive here, that a letter that says, number 1, your guy did it, and number 2, your guy's lawyer is suborning perjury. The fact that they think that is Brady material is just...
It's not. Like, for those, you don't need a law degree. It's not. It's beyond not, right? So, okay, so there's these filings.
Yes.
And we've talked about how this kicks appeal down the road. So where are we in this case? We've already had the trial. We've had the verdict. There's all these filings. Is the purpose just to keep this case relevant? Because we all know that typically once a trial is over and there's a conviction, then that's about it. Unless there's, some movement for newfound evidence later, which we do not have here at all. So what's going on? Do you think it's just to stay relevant within the space so that people continue to talk about this case?
That's the only thing that makes sense. That also fits the pattern of how these attorneys have operated throughout this entire process. Some people have asked us, do you think they're just trying to extend the deadline for the appeals? But if the appellate attorneys need the deadline extended, that's not really a difficult process for them to do.
They can just ask for an extension.
Yeah, no, get it.
And they'll 100% get it. We grant, we always grant those basically.
Their client's in prison. Nobody cares.
Yeah, especially with a trial this long. Yeah, like we're like, 60 days, 6 months, go for it.
Yeah.
But one thing, this is not how you extend deadlines. This is called, wasting the court's time and resources. But this is not helping. Procedurally, this doesn't help his appeal. This doesn't help. The only procedural way to attack the conviction is an appeal, a direct appeal. And so what they're doing now doesn't really do anything to advance the ball to overturn the conviction. So I note all this because it seems like the only reason then to be filing all these things is for purposes other than to help your client overturn the conviction. It's to stay relevant. It's to, I don't know, have people want to watch movies about it, to read books about it. I don't know what it is, but it's certainly not helping Richard Allen for purposes of his conviction. Because
one thing the appellate attorneys, this is one possibility, is the appellate attorneys are like, we really want to appeal on this, so we need to get this in the record, so file this. Surely the appellate attorneys are not asking for this kind of information, because we all know Judge Gold is not going to grant any of this. That can't be the case, right? That the appellate attorneys are going to head down this path.
This is a cursed case. I feel like I've said this. It's like a cursed object in like a movie where if you wear the necklace, then like half the people who do die or like go insane. And we did whole profile episodes on how great these defense attorneys were supposed to be. So I reputationally, the appellate attorneys, come across well. But that's, who knows what's going to happen? There's been people claiming that the defense is working with the appellate team. I don't know why the appellate team would want that, given all that has happened, but I don't know if that's true or not.
Certainly it's possible that one of the issues the appellate attorneys might want to raise is whether or not evidence against possible guilt of third parties was wrongfully excluded. But I wouldn't think they'd want to use this particular set of arguments.
Right. I was going to say, this is not a some other dude did it defense. This is a my guy did it with some other dudes.
I remember during the Murdaugh case, there were people who were like, well, they can't convict him because clearly he hired somebody to kill his family. And I'm like, no. So do you think if he just got up on the stand and said, ha, I actually hired people to do it. I didn't do it myself. You can't convict me. I'm beyond being convicted. Yeah, that's the loophole. It's almost like, since people get this wrong all the time, though, in fairness, since the prosecution's theory was wrong, they thought he did it by himself, but he didn't do it by himself. He had accomplices. So you have to try him again. Like, no, Ron Logan's dead. We could try Kagan Klein. Like, if it turned out, if tomorrow a video came out and, well, by God, there's Kagan Klein and Richard Allen murdering those people, then we just try Kagan Klein. Like, Richard Allen doesn't get another trial because the prosecution's theory was slightly off. So to me, it's stupid. And I cannot believe I'm saying this. As dumb as the Odinist theory was, the Odinist theory now seems like a solid, peelable theory that, who knows, maybe if you get the right judges, compared to this. Like, this is so absurd.
And let's just be clear, the Odinism theory was not. It was not good. And it was fit within the wrong legal package of a Frank's motion. Yeah. But like, the whole point being this is all such malarkey.
I hate to, because we got guests, so I shouldn't be talking this much. But why are the sticks arranged in a runic form? Why is there a rune on the tree? Why did all these things happen that supposedly go along? Why did Elvis say what he said to the police? Like, how does this fit into sort of the grand conspiracy of the Richard Allen defenders? Is this not an existential crisis for them? Now, I understand, as we've said multiple times, that a lot of them were always Ron Logan people.
Yes.
They never believed Odinism, ever. And it was always an excuse. And sort of now, like, the mask is off, right?
This is going to get weird. It's going to get historical. But after Mary the First took over from her brother Edward in the Tudor age, right? There were a lot of people who had been sort of like, yeah, we're Church of England, no problem. and then they went back to Catholicism, right? They were just kind of faking it until they got a Catholic sovereign again. So it feels like what we're seeing here is sort of mask off with a lot of these Loganites, or whatever you want to call them, who have been just waiting for this opportunity, and who I think felt very hurt in the beginning that their suspect wasn't picked. I think they would have preferred that over Odinism. But you know what, by gum, Odinism's fun. It's got a lot, it's a cult in the woods and the white supremacists, and it's all connected. And so they were going to deal with that, but then they were going to go. I mean, at this point, this is their home. I think they're very unhappy, if I had to guess, that Kagan Klein has been thrown into the mix, because goodness gracious, we got so much hate just for reporting on Kagan Klein. People were like, basically, how dare you distract from the true villain, who is, of course, Ron Logan. And now they're being forced to say, no, Kagan Klein was along for the ride. He was the IT guy.
He was the tech support.
Yeah,
He's the tech support.
He's the genius bar for the pedophiles locally, apparently. It's just, it's I don't know. Can I just say,
Again, what you're saying is you can have, you're talking about people who are watching this case from afar. These filings are written by his lawyers. It's a whole different ball game that we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, and I will just say, you asked, why is this happening? And I often think I don't know, I guess I was too online in my early 20s, but I often think about Delphi in terms of, if you've ever been on Twitter, if you were on Twitter in the kind of golden age, there was that guy Drill who would do all those funny tweets and stuff. And this one, just the thing that keeps popping into my mind completely unbidden is, I'm not owned, I scream as I turn into a corn cob. That's what this whole thing has the feel of. Basically a primal scream from a man who cannot believe what has happened. And is basically, that must be kind of, to be a little sympathetic, you lose the biggest case you'll ever have, most likely. And you lose it in a way that a lot of people are kind of like, yikes about. And that must be kind of helpless when you're then done and you have to go home, and maybe you feel like you went through a lot and you don't have anything to show for it. So you kind of keep going. That's the only thing you know how to do. I don't know. I'm completely speculating here. I don't know what's in his mind, but this all feels very weirdly personal, and there's no practical reason for this to be happening. So and the way these are written are just so emotional. It's just, the whole thing's weird. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
There's an odd moment in the most recent filing where Baldwin gloats like it's a personal triumph that he was able to stand up to the prosecutor and get him to release these letters which implicated his client and got him accused of supporting perjury. It's just through the looking glass. It's like, what's going on?
For discipline, sorry, and we'll have an evidentiary hearing. We'll bring this guy in. We'll let him testify. We'll see what he says. I don't. The attempt to thread the needle here of he's lying about everything that hurts us, but all the good stuff he is telling the absolute God's honest truth. Because as you said, even the whole Keegan Klein was lying thing doesn't work, because you need him to be lying about Baldwin and what he said. Right. It is bizarre. So, okay. So where do we go from here? Surely this is the last gasp of the defense, right? We're not going to get another filing next week, are we?
Yeah. Don't jinx us.
Don't. As long as they're allowed to, they'll keep going. Can I also just add, we haven't even touched on this. How ridiculous is it that this guy, Ricky Davis, is just bouncing from Delphi figure to Delphi figure and getting them to confess immediately and give,
he's amazing. He's the
amazing. We should bring him in to work all of our cases.
Yes.
I'm just glad that after having a lengthy career of criminal violations that involve dishonesty, he has finally turned over a new leaf and is now a truth-telling, honest broker for the prison, who just so happens to earn the trust of all the most important people. It's amazing. We should go ahead and send Richard Allen to his prison. Maybe he'll confess to him as well. That'll finish it up.
If he can,
we should just move him around the country. Every time we should send him to Idaho. He can hang out with Brian Koberger.
He's the traveling truth teller.
Put him in a room with Karen Reed, or all 27 of the conspirators. Maybe they would all confess to him, since he's so good at earning people's trust.
If he got Richard Allen to confess to him, I'm sure Andy Baldwin would file a motion about what a triumph it was. That would help this case.
Yeah.
Okay, so we said we wouldn't spend that much time on it, but here we go, giving it a lot of time. But with that said, I mean, where does it go from here? There's going to be a ruling, and then are we done? What more can we do? Are we going to talk about how hard prison is for him? Yes.
Probably, knowing these guys, I wouldn't be surprised if they filed something saying, oh, there was discovery violations because we didn't get these letters when we should have. Who knows what they can possibly come up with to try to drag this out. I'm hoping the curtain comes down on them soon and we get to the appellate attorneys who I hope they have to be more professional than this. I very much hope so.
They don't have to be anything. Just assume the worst and stupidest thing is going to happen. That's what I do. And then I'm always right in this case. And I mean, we wanted to ask you all what the next step would be because we assume there's no way that this stops. The judge can't just say, hey, get out of here, I'm assuming.
I mean, she'll deny this. I'm surprised she hadn't already done it. She'll probably deny it tomorrow. Maybe she takes to the weekend, but we'll see. And I mean, at some point, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess the thing is, it's kind of like we were saying, he's in prison. So them dragging it out doesn't really hurt anybody. You know what I mean? Like in our court, I don't know what Indiana's civil procedure rules are. In our court, you only have 14 days after conviction to file this kind of stuff. Like in the first 14 days, you can file motions that basically say there's some dramatic, terrible thing wrong with this. Here's the reasons we need to immediately vacate the sentence and the conviction or whatever. Right. And then you got to file an appeal. If you hadn't filed an appeal within 14 days, you've waived your appeal. So I don't know. It seems like Indiana doesn't have that necessarily. It seems like every time they file one of these things, it sort of extends this deadline more and more. So I don't know if there's ever a drop dead time for Indiana, but I would hope that she would deny this and that the next step would be they go ahead and file the appeal and then they move forward. That's what I would hope happens. But, you know, these, and we said this before, in these famous cases with these attorneys who are not maybe as ethical as you would like, they really show how if you don't respect the rules, you can mess everything up, right? That like so much of the judicial system working depends on all the parties playing fair and not trying to take advantage of things. And these guys have shown they're willing to take advantage of things at every turn.
Because we're supposed to be professionals who uphold an oath. We're not supposed to be like fed every single line along the way. That's not what our profession is, right? We are supposed to operate on the capital of integrity and goodwill. We always say that, like the best thing we have to trade on is our integrity. Kevin knows this. It's same with a lot of professions, but very much so in the law, because unlike say medicine, where there's probably like only certain ways you should do brain surgery, there's not only one way you can write a Frank's motion. There's not only one way you can attack the evidence, right? It much more is an art rather than a science. And because of that, we're supposed to all act like adults. And this is what happens when you have someone who everyone else is trying to act like an adult, but they are throwing spaghetti at the wall, wasting resources, wasting taxpayer dollars on both sides of the V, because taxpayer dollars are funding both. And by the way, re-victimizing the real victims over and over, lest we forget that family members are seeing this splashed across the news. What they deserve is a conviction and then an orderly process of the appeals that he's entitled, but that's it. Not this entitled, dragged on, fantastical make-believe of what their loved ones did not go through, because this is all complete, jargony mess. None of this is rooted in evidence or truth. So let us not forget that part as well, is the people being re-victimized by having to read this insanity in the news and in the courts.
And that actually brings up something, reminds me of something that I think for me might have been the most disturbing part of any of these filings, which is, so Ricky Davis, part of his absurd story is that there were like handcuffs or something around the wrists of the girls. Absolutely no evidence of that, no sign of that in the postmortem. None of the experts who examined the girls saw any signs of that. But in this filing, Baldwin writes that he, his co-counsel Jennifer Auger, and his conspiracy theory investigator, a man named Matt Hoffman, they examined the pictures of the bodies of these lost girls and stared at their wrists until they thought that they could convince themselves that they saw some signs there that there had been handcuffs there. And something about the mental picture of those three people just pawing through photos of the dead bodies of these wonderful girls, it's very disturbing to me.
Right. They're using, again, this horrid reality of the murders of these girls to essentially write fan fiction on the side. That's how I read these filings. It's offensive. It's not just offensive to the law and the courts. It's absolutely offensive to anyone who is seeing this from the outside. Imagine this is your most loved ones. And that's what I can describe this as. It sounds like horrid fan fiction that nobody would read. But here we have it being stamped in the dockets within the court system. And it has real consequences beyond just wasting paper that it's printed on. Now I'm mad about it. It was funny at first, but now I'm just mad.
That's what we went through. We were mad, and then we thought it was funny, and then we were really mad.
And yeah, I mean, that's the thing about it. I mean, I've called it a farce before. I'll call it a farce again. I mean, it's if it weren't so terrible, it would be hilarious, and we would not be laughing with them. We would be laughing at them, because that is how absurd these filings are. And I, as a lawyer, I know there are times when you have to file things that you know are weak, really weak, but you just have to, because that's your obligation, your client. You got to make the best argument you can. You know you're going to lose, and that's fine. That is not this. That is not what they're doing here. This is not vigorous advocacy. They have an obligation at all. They're choosing to take this path, and they're choosing to write it like that. I mean, that is a conscious decision to do that. To make that argument is a conscious decision.
And I see people who are, along with they have to have vigorous advocacy. This is not vigorous advocacy. And people say, well, Baldwin is just so emotionally invested in this case. First of all, you're not someone's therapist. You're someone's lawyer, number one. So a lawyer should not be emotionally invested in anything. And I might buy that argument if it weren't re-victimizing the actual victims in this case in such an egregious manner. This goes beyond just caring about your client. This is something much more. I think the fact that his client we don't even know what he thinks in all this. As someone was saying, is his client directing him to say that? I bet your bottom dollar, if you had to file a very weak argument, you would make it known to the court that your client wants to make sure that the court knows about X, Y, and Z.
I've seen those filings, and that's exactly
I've seen those filings, and everyone can read between the lines, because we are all trading on integrity and recognizing what the advocate must do in this situation, but reading between the lines. That is not happening here. Like all of these other fantastical filings, both pre, during, and post-trial, it has the lawyer's names written all over it, but I don't necessarily see this being directed by Richard Allen.
No, I mean, at trial, I remember this, Dr. Martin, one of the witnesses, talked about how Allen made some kind of statement. I don't remember the specifics, about how one of his attorneys was the bad cop and one of his attorneys was the good cop. I really don't think Allen's been in the driver's seat for a lot of this. And frankly, one of the things that we found most bizarre about covering this case is how synonymous belief in Allen's innocence became with sort of rabid support for his defense team. Because there were times where we felt like we don't really know if this defense team's doing really a great job by their client. And that was always perceived. It got cheap.
We said the same thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like he probably, if I were in his family, I'd be like concerned about what he's getting. I don't think they were ineffective by any means, but I think he could have had better. I think they did a lot of things wrong. And I don't know. It is upsetting, and the fact that it keeps going on and just the incompetence, but that it's celebrated in some quarters as like some kind of like master stroke of legal writing is just really embarrassing, but does make you feel like, to borrow Kevin's phrase, like you've fallen through the looking glass.
Well, I mean, I'm waiting for the Deus Ex Machina, where this grand strategy is finally going to just come together, and all of a sudden he's going to be exonerated. The real killers will be arrested. It's going to be amazing.
That's not going to happen, but hopefully this will be the last of the filings. Anya's shaking her head because she knows better, but Thank you guys for reading these and for updating on it so that we don't have to go, we, as in the royal we, don't have to spend time doing this, because it truly is, you go through kind of the stages of grief with these filings for journalism, for the victims, for true crime, and for the practice of law. This is not the way you should practice law. But thank you guys. Thank you guys, as always, for reporting on all of these cases, these filings with such a neutral, truly, I mean this, from a neutral perspective, because you want the information to be out there. You could have easily just said, this is baloney, and left, but you didn't. So thank you for that.
That's very generous.
You're very, very kind.
I feel like neutrality's probably gone out the window with some. There might have been.
You presented what was in the filings.
Yeah, we said, here's what happened.
Truly, that's more than it's due.
We sighed loudly, and then we said what they said. But we really appreciate that. You guys are always a delight to talk to, and we just appreciate the work you all do, making true crime a saner place. So always happy to chat, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Well, the last thing I'll say before we let you go, if you're not aware, Shadow of the Bridge, The Delphi Murders and the Dark Side of the American Heartland is coming out August 5th, 2025. It is written by none other than Aine Kane and Kevin Greenlee. It is available for pre-order now wherever you get books. I just purchased my own copy, so I'm looking forward to getting it signed.
Thank you so much.
At some point in the near future. Make sure you do that. And the other thing, if you are interested in this case and you have not listened to the Murder Sheet's interviews with so many of the people involved in this case, from the prosecutors to the investigators, it is incredible work they have done. And I'll say this, especially if you're out there listening and you don't like the prosecutors and you don't like the police, listen to it, because sometimes when you hear someone and they're real and you're getting some insight into them, it changes your perspective. When all you read is, the headlines, and maybe you've come to believe they're all these sort of faceless devils, when you actually hear something about them, it can really change your view. So check that out. It's amazing. Some of the best podcast journalism out there. So I hope you'll listen to that. And thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Well, guys, thank you so much to Kevin and Aine for being on this show. They are always a fan favorite and our favorites as well. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
I'm Aine.
And I'm Kevin.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Murder Sheet has joined us.
Yeah.
Yay. That's awesome.
Have you
Straight
guys,
from your
like-
live. Some of you are coming from their live to
Oh
our
my
live.
goodness.
And you see 'em
You
here
are-
again.
You guys are awesome for doing this. Thank you for. Are you like caught up on? Is there a possibility of getting caught up on sleep? No.
I think we're doing.
They're finishing their book now.
Yeah.
I know.
For the 64 of you here, if you haven't pre-ordered it, you can go ahead and do that. I'm going to go and get the link. There's a link. Let's see. It's called
Really
what? Under the Bridge? Downtown?
Under the bridge.
Under the bridge, like the
Downtown.
Pluto TV has all the shows and movies you love streaming for free. That means laughter is free with gut-busting comedies like The Neighborhood, Boomerang, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Bueller.
Mystery is free with countless cases to crack from Criminal Minds, Tracker, and Matlock.
I'm a lawyer, like the old TV show.
And thrills are free with heart-pumping hits like The Walking Dead and Pulp Fiction.
Correctamundo.
Feel the free Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.